Hey guys, I hope all is well. I'm back in Season 3 with another build for Diablo 4, and this time I'm running Hydras. Yes, these fiery serpents are an army in and of themselves, especially when considering their enchantment that for every 200 mana you spend, a 5-headed Hydra will spawn and fight for you. Theoretically, there is no limit to how many Hydras you can spawn, just as long as you keep hitting that mana mark, and since there are ways to either reduce that mana requirement or make it so your mana regeneration is very high, you can spawn quite a lot of Hydras. This idea kind of fascinated me and I wanted to see if I could get a build going with it, and it turned out better than I expected, honestly, being able to do a tier 100 vault and taking down Uber Lilith. Honestly, it isn't the highest DPS build you'll see, but it's definitely respectable because it's pretty well rounded in damage and defense. There's a ton of CC, I'm capped out on resistances, and I'm able to do high level endgame content and kill all the bosses. It was definitely a fun build to put together and play with. In the video you'll see me easily unlocking World Tier 4, followed by all the boss kills, then a Tier 100 vault, and I'll save the Lilith kill for last. But before we jump in, I'd like to ask that you please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. So conceptually, I thought to myself, how can I abuse the Hydra enchantment that lets me spawn more Hydras? I realized that the only way to do that was to have a high mana sustain, and after I fine-tune the Hydra spam, all that's left is to just pump a ton of damage through crit damage, and attack speed, and I figured I'd have myself a strong conjuration setup. The first thing I realized is you're gonna want to reduce the 200 mana requirement. You can do this through the unique Paragon node Enchantment Master. This node makes your enchantments 20% stronger, and what it does for Hydra is the mana requirement to spawn more Hydras is now reduced to 167 mana, down from 200 mana, which basically just makes it so you have to spend less mana to summon more Hydras. Therefore, you spawn more Hydras more often. So after we lower the Hydra proc requirement, we have to sustain our mana. Now, there's no one true way to sustain infinite mana, so the best thing to do is to utilize many smaller ways to generate mana, so that when put together, you will never run out of mana and you can spam all you want. The first thing I'd like to mention is something I learned from Season 2 as a Ball Lightning Sorcerer, which is basically to generate lots of crackling energy so that they're easy to pick up, and with 3 points into Invigorating Conduit, you recover 12 mana per crackling energy. The best way to spawn crackling energy as a non-lightning build is through Destructive Chain Lightning. Destructive Chain Lightning will give you a 30% chance to spawn crackling energies when you crit with Chain Lightning. We do stack a decent amount of crits, so we have absolutely no issues generating lots of crackling energies. Also, on the skill tree, we spec into Shimmering Frost Nova. This will grant you 4 mana for every enemy hit by your Frost Nova. By itself, it's not the best because it requires you to be in the middle of a pack of enemies to get the most out of it. However, when coupled with the Frost Nova enchantment, every time any of your conjuration skills gets a lucky hit on an enemy, there's a 30% chance for that hit to unleash a Frost Nova. Since we're spamming Hydras and we have at least one Lightning Spear going around, and we build heavily into lucky hit, this will not only tremendously increase the odds of a Frost Nova going off and freezing enemies, but will also significantly increase our mana regeneration and sustain. Through Crackling Energies and Shimmering Frost Nova, I was able to sustain my mana rather comfortably. However, if this isn't comfortable enough for you, there is a whole arsenal of aspects that you can utilize to better help with your mana sustain. Aspect of Concentration increases your mana regeneration if you haven't taken damage in the last 2 seconds. Incendiary Aspect causes lucky hits from your Pyromancy skills to have a small chance to restore 10 mana. Prodigy's Aspect restores a good chunk of mana every time you use a cooldown skill, which will even work every time your Frost Nova goes off through lucky hits from your conjurations. Then you have Recharging Aspect, which restores a small amount of mana with each bounce of your Chain Lightning. And lastly, I just want to mention Frost Blitz Aspect, which gives you a second use of your Frost Nova but increases the cooldown of it. This is useful just in case you'd like to have the option of having an additional guaranteed freeze or stagger builder on bosses. However, I didn't want to use it because Elemental Attunement helps reset our defensives and it was a good enough sustain for my Frost Nova. Alrighty, so moving on to gear. For our helm, our main focus is plus ranks to Hydra, which means you shouldn't be using a unique helm since the plus 4 Hydras is way too significant of a boost. Unless of course you have Shaco, which gives plus 4 to everything anyways. For our chest, I decided to go heavily into DPS and was luckily able to hit the best 3 damage affixes, which are plus to fire, plus to pyromancy, and plus to conjuration. Literally 3 damage boosts to Hydras. There is a non-specific plus damage affix, but it only goes up to 10%, which is far below these other 3, so I decided to focus on these 3, especially because they're all perfectly relevant. For my gloves, I focused on crit chance, lucky hit chance, and attack speed, all of which are pretty important for our build in terms of DPS and utility. For our legs, we didn't really focus on one thing in particular, just make sure you don't have plus to skills because the bonus ranks to skills on the pants aren't too relevant or helpful for this build, so you just want to generally focus on defensives. For my boots, I thought Penitent Greaves would be best due to the high movement speed and the Trail of Frost DPS boost, which also synergizes nicely with our Paragon control glyph. For my wand, I focused on intelligence and crit damage, and I wanted intelligence on my wand because this affix provides the most due to it giving DPS, Paragon Board unlocks, and it also is helpful for our resistances. For my amulet, I really lucked out and got a perfect best in slot DPS amulet, but honestly, you just really want to be primarily focusing on plus 3 ranks to conjurations. The rest you can really pick and choose whatever you want, whatever you're comfortable with, and whatever your build needs. And also, one thing to note is I choose to go with Conjuration Mastery instead of Glass Cannon because honestly, Sorcerer isn't too tanky to begin with, and increasing the damage we take doesn't really help us survive and do high level dungeons. Plus, we're spamming Conjurations anyway, so Conjuration Mastery is still going to give us a bunch of free damage anyways. For my first ring, I think the unique ring Talrasha's Iridescent Loop is pretty damn strong because it just gives us so much damage to build, and the lucky hit and utility isn't bad either. For my second ring, I focus on crit chance, crit damage, and lucky hit chance because these are the most important to our build. Lastly, for my focus, I primarily wanted crit chance and lucky hit chance. For the rest of the affixes on my gear, I focused on stats, armor, life, and resistances. For my jewels, I focused on rubies for life, skulls for armor, and sapphires for damage to crowd-controlled enemies, which we have a ton of in this build. For our aspects, the main one is Serpentine because that will allow us to spawn a second Hydra. This aspect you can't farm from a dungeon because it isn't a guaranteed drop, and I unfortunately couldn't find it until later in World Tier 4, but I think that was just a little unlucky. You can roll pretty much with one Hydra for the majority of your leveling, but once you get that second Hydra, your DPS will skyrocket. The next important one is Battlecaster because this gives a good chance to go plus 3 rank to Hydras, which is a huge DPS boost. This aspect also cannot be target farmed unfortunately, so you're just going to have to extract it off of a dropped legendary. The last important one I'd say is aspect of Splintering Energy because it gives a good chance to spawn 2 lightning spears instead of 1, which means more stuns, more frost novas going off, and better mana sustain. This one you can pick up from the Crumbling Hekma dungeon in Kyrgyzstan. For the rest, you can honestly use whatever mix of offense, defense, or utility that you want depending on your needs, but I personally use Conceited and Control aspects for damage, and for defense, I go Disobedience, Audacity, and Shared Misery. This section is for Season 3 only, so for our little spider pet, the most important governing stone is Flash of Adrenaline because this gives a multiplicative damage boost, so I tune it with Tactical and Duration to decrease the cooldown time and increase the duration because when they're leveled up, it'll grant me 100% uptime on my Flash of Adrenaline damage boost. And I also tune it with Fortify for a defense boost. For the other governing stone, I use Lightning Bolt because it arcs, and I tune it with Multi-Shot and Arcing so that it can hit as many enemies as possible, and I also tune it with Efficiency so that I gain increased crit chance to every enemy hit, which is a huge boost to our DPS. So as far as leveling the build goes, it really depends on whether or not you've previously completed 400 Renown on each of the 5 regions on a previous character. If you didn't, then you can still follow the same path, but I highly recommend completing your Renown while leveling because those 10 extra skill points are free and you should absolutely prioritize unlocking them. If you did, then on any new character, you'll start at level 2 with 12 skill points, which is a huge head start. If this is you, then the good news is you can start the game right away with Hydra Hydras. I put a point into Arc Lash and Enhanced Arc Lash, and then I got a point into Fireball and a point into Chain Lightning into Destructive Chain Lightning. Then you pick up your defenses, so that'll be Flame Shield, Teleport, and Frost Nova into Shimmering Frost Nova. And then with your 12th point, you can put that into Hydra and start using it right away. So at this point, you'll still be level 2 and you'll need to get to level 15 to start using enchantments. Go ahead and do the Zenith Dungeon in Fractured Peaks to pick up recharging aspects so that you recover mana when your Chain Lightning bounces. For the next 13 points, you'll put 4 into Hydra, 1 into Enhanced Hydra, and 1 into Invoked Hydra. Then 3 while pathing to Invoked Lightning Spear, and lastly put 3 into Glass Cannon, and 1 into Elemental Attunement. Now that you're level 15, go ahead and do the quest to get your enchantment slot and enchant Fireball right away, because this will significantly increase your kill speed. Now you'll need another 15 points to get your second enchantment slot at level 30. So you'll start by putting 1 point into Static Discharge and 3 points into Invigorating Conduit. This will help us generate our crackling energies. Then 3 into Inner Flames, then 1 into Permafrost, just so that we can put 3 into Hoarfrost. I spec into this cluster because we will be freezing things a lot, and so Hoarfrost will boost our damage. Now you should have unlocked the last cluster on your skill tree, and we'll put that next point right into Shatter, because this will replace our Fireball's explosions. This is huge because we not only free up an enchantment slot, but now we can unspec out of Fireball and use that point elsewhere. So we replace our Fireball enchant with Hydra. Then we put a point into Potent Warding so that we can spec out of Fireball. And then we put that extra point right into Align the Elements. For our last 2 points, we put 1 each into Mana Shield and Protection. Now that you're level 30, we will enchant our Frost Nova, and now we should be freezing things more and sustaining our mana better. For the remainder of the skill tree, path to Shimmering Teleport, and then max out Conjuration Mastery, Potent Warding, Elemental Attunement, Precise Magic, Align the Elements, Mana Shield, and Protection. For the starting Paragon board, I get most of the intelligence nodes and I socket Conjurer to give us that initial boost in DPS, plus the extra uptime duration is nice in the beginning if you're struggling with mana sustain. For the second and third boards, we want to get Enchantment Master and Static Surge as soon as possible to lower the Hydra proc requirement and to sustain mana. For the time being, I didn't focus too much on allocating everything I wanted. I pretty much just got all the DPS nodes and any convenient defensive nodes along the way, while focusing on dexterity and willpower during pathing. Basically, you want to get to these 2 legendary nodes as quick as possible because the unlocks are way too important for the flow of the build. And then I went back and unlocked everything else afterwards. For the second board, I socketed Destruction, and on the third board, I socketed Invocation, which will both give a massive boost to crit damage. Destruction does apply to conjurations, and Invocation is specific only to conjurations. But either way, both will boost the crit damage to our Hydras. For the fourth board, I path upwards from the second board, and we get Searing Heat, which will give us a nice boost to our Hydra crit chance and DPS. I also socket Control for even more DPS, especially since our Penitent Greaves will be chilling everything around us, and our Frost Novas go off so often that it will be freezing things pretty reliably, and those enemies will just take a lot more damage from the Hydras. And for our final board, we go Elemental Summoner. I opted to go for this board because it lowers the mana cost of Hydra, which may seem counterintuitive to reaching our mana requirement to proc Hydra, but we have to keep in mind that we're not spamming Hydras to proc more Hydras. We summon our Hydras and we spam Chain Lightning to proc more Hydras. So reducing the mana cost of only Hydras isn't an issue, plus it also gives a huge boost to our DPS. Also, one thing to note is I do pick up Swift Conjurer because an increase in attack speed does apply to Hydra attack speed. And for our last glyph, we do get Enchanter for the DPS and plus to max res. Alrighty, so here's my character. I just wanted to show one thing in terms of stats. So as you can see, I have about 357 crit damage from all sources. However, if I go to my Paragon board and I remove Invocation, that crit damage doesn't change, which is honestly very strange, but that crit damage also does apply to my Hydras and not me, which I guess does make sense. However, this crit damage does apply to Hydras as well. So this crit damage coupled with invocation crit damage, you're looking at about 567% increased crit damage in totality, which is a huge damage boost to our Hydras, which is absolutely amazing. And just to show, like I said, I'm capped out on all my resistances. I have a very decent crit chance at 40%, but there's also an invisible plus 13% from my little spider pet through efficiency support. So arcing, multi-shot lightning bolt hits a lot of enemies, and all those enemies will take a bonus 13% increased crit chance from me and my Hydras. So I'm actually looking at about 53% chance to crit, which is actually not bad at all. And lastly, I just wanted to show I have about 66.6% chance to do a lucky hit, which is honestly pretty damn good. Alrighty, so one thing to note before I jump into the Lilith fight, I was running a different stone setup here. So instead of lightning bolt, as you can see, the attack speed is 1.3. If I change that with Tempest, the attack speed is 0.8, so it'll go off faster. So instead of multi-shot and arcing, I had frigid and swift support, which brings this attack speed down to 0.6 seconds, which is amazing because this will go off very often and apply a cold debuff, a chill to Lilith, and it'll build that stagger bar pretty quickly, which is a very nice complementary support stagger bar builder to my Frost Novas. And I was able to stagger Lilith much quicker with it than without it. And lastly, to show, my Flash of Adrenaline does have permanent uptime because my duration is 12 seconds, however my cooldown is also 12 seconds. Alrighty, so I saved the best for last, the stupid and frustrating Uber Lilith fight. The damage and stagger is definitely respectable, I'd say, and I didn't have to use any fancy potions. All I used was an Elixir of Demon Slaying to boost my damage a little. I also playtested with Elixir of Combat Fortune, which boosts my lucky hit chance. However, it didn't really help too much. If anything, it got in the way of me timing my staggers. And other than that, the fight was just spamming Hydras, building stagger, and dodging mechanics through mobility and flame shield. The Hydras clean up the ads pretty well, and you're free to move around as much as you want. So yeah, there you have it, a fully functional pure Hydra build. Please let me know your thoughts and feedback. Let me know if you're interested by the build idea, or if you have any other interesting build ideas in mind that you'd like to see me play with. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you next time.